Game Boy Works episode 116 brings you a huge load of bull. Well, we're back to Game Boy, and if this isn't the most Game Boy game imaginable, I don't know what is. Battle Bull comes to us from Sega, who have previously delivered an okayish puzzler in Cubicle, and the interesting, if slight, ninja dungeon crawler Ayakashi no Shiro. Battle Bull continues the Sega legacy of games that are perfectly decent, but basically don't rise above getting the job done. It does seem an effort was made to rise above, but the effort didn't really pan out, so we end up with middle-of-the-road mundanity all the same. Anyway, the title Battle Bull turns out to be shorthand for Battle Bulldozer, since the action revolves around a heavily armed space bulldozer crushing robotic foes in a maze. The manual explains this as a sort of extraplanetary mining disaster, although the ending suggests that this is some sort of blood sport, which admittedly isn't the most egregious inconsistency that ever happened between in-game text and manual text during the 8-bit era. Whatever the real story here, Battle Bull could have just as easily been called Combat Sokoban. There's no puzzle solving here, but you are pushing, not pulling boxes, which is to say this is simply a step removed from the standard Game Boy fare of box-pushing puzzle games. Some points for creativity then, although really Battle Bull probably owes its greatest debt to Sega's Pengo, a great 1982 arcade title in which you played a penguin kicking ice blocks at enemies from the same top-down point of view as seen here. Sega, or rather developer Jordan, basically took this concept, added machines to it, and attempted to integrate an economy and power-up scheme. Gameplay in Battle Bull isn't too complex. You control the eponymous bulldozer, and you traverse grid-like mazes filled with boxes and enemy mechs in a kill or be killed situation. Initially, you can destroy an enemy by pushing a box into it, which will go skittering across the screen until it hits a wall and crushes anything it smashes into the wall. Enemies can turn the tables on the player though, crushing them instead. Although this being an old video game, the player will also explode upon the merest contact with a bad guy. Each of the 48 stages here simply requires you to clear out a set number of enemies before time runs out. In a kind of neat touch, the level doesn't end once the timer runs down. Instead, a new enemy appears and begins filling the screen with boxes that will crush anything beneath them, be it player or foe. As you progress, you earn cash, which you can use to upgrade your Battle Bulldozer. These range from speed boosts to more powerful steam shovels to offensive weaponry. Actually, the bulldozer can be equipped with jump capabilities or weapons, though not both at once. Jumping allows you to leap over enemies but not blocks, whereas the high-end missile can pierce blocks and take out multiple enemies in a row, meaning there's really only one choice here, the missiles. The downside is that it's really difficult to acquire that high-end missile upgrade, which gets to the biggest flaw in Battle Bull, the upgrade system. Nice as the concept is, its ultimate effect is to make Battle Bull far more tedious and punishing than it ought to be. By default, your bulldozer is pathetic, slow, weak, defenseless. You have just enough cash at the outset to buy the first engine upgrade, but all that does is take your survivability from 0 to meager. By the time you reach the 5th or 6th level of the game, you really need the maximum engine upgrade. But while Battle Bull offers infinite continues, your cash earnings reset every time you continue. Saving up for upgrades can be tough to do when you're grossly underpowered, but you need to buy the upgrades to stop being underpowered. That's reasonable game design, but the issue in Battle Bull is that you only receive your earnings and visit the shop between stages, meaning that once your earnings get wiped, the only way forward is to continue playing with your setup as is through increasingly brutal stages. It doesn't take long to hit a point in the game loop where your only hope of survival is to buy upgrades. Yet it's impossible to survive long enough to earn the cash to get those upgrades. Honestly, Battle Bull can be pretty tough even when you're upgraded. The game would play just as well and be perfectly challenging if you were simply given a fully kitted out bulldozer from the start. It doesn't help that the strangely sticky control mechanics mean that even once you're maxed out, you'll still get hung up on scenery or miss a critical offensive opportunity because the box-pushing mechanics require greater precision than the controls properly allow. It also doesn't help that some stages are designed in a way that you need to know which way to move or attack immediately upon arrival, otherwise you'll be crushed by an attack from an opponent off-screen. It's a shame because the game otherwise is pretty decent. Your enemies possess a variety of different behaviors that work in concert to confuse and distract you from the threats they represent. From erratic random mechs that pay no heed to the player's presence, to aggressive enemy bulldozers that will crush and push everything in their path in order to smash your machine, the enemy lineup is thoughtfully crafted and keeps things interesting. Enemy mechs grow in power as you advance, with the catchy background tunes shifting to indicate a corresponding boost in enemy power. Which is to say, Battle Bull has a lot of nice ideas and mechanics that don't quite gel. The controls need more polish, and the upgrade system as presented here tends to be more of a detriment than a benefit. This appears to have been the first Game Boy title ever created by developer Joridon, aka Jordan, whose history on the English language web is wildly inconsistent. Moby Games claims the company was established in 1979, while Wikipedia cites them as being founded in 1991. GameFAQs lists them as the studio responsible for 1980's Mooncresta, but also indicates an 8-year gap in game development between Mooncresta and their next listed title, Captain Silver for Famicom. Anyway, it's not bad for a first attempt on the hardware. Joridon probably could have refined the ideas here into a real winner given the opportunity to create a sequel, but that evidently never arose, whereas our next game is a sequel that really didn't need to happen. Battle Bull wraps up November 1990, and Navy Blue 90 takes us into December and into the year's final stretch with another sequel for Game Boy that no one asked for. At this point in Game Boy's life, we don't have a second Super Mario Land or Final Fantasy Legend or Gargoyle's Quest, but we sure do have multiple titles in series like Trump Boy, Boxel, and now Navy Blue. You'll recall the original Navy Blue from the tail end of Game Boy Works 1989. Developed by Pack-In Video and published by Use Corp, Navy Blue was eventually localized into English as Battleship, courtesy of Mindscape. Navy Blue 90 then is simply the year-later update to the game that was so closely based on Battleship that Battleship's owners okayed licensing it from Use Corp. As you would expect, this is largely the same game with a few minor embellishments. The visuals are a little nicer, you have a wider array of ship types, including a stubbier version of the aircraft carrier and a solitary fighter plane. And you have a slightly wider array of tools at your disposal, including more granular control over your torpedo targeting and extra sonar options. Probably the nicest new addition here is that when you fire a projectile that lands one space from an actual target, you're given a small arrow icon to indicate the fact that you're on the right track. Although you still have to guess which direction the target is from your shot, you can more easily triangulate your follow-ups. And finally, the last notable addition to Navy Blue 90 is that it now includes artificial intelligence programming that truly brings the BS to Battleship. I've touched on this issue before with every single naval combat game we've seen on Game Boy, of which incidentally this is the fourth in the space of a year, meaning one in roughly 25 Game Boy games released over this past year was a largely identical naval combat title. And what they all have in common is that basically, it's impossible to experience a truly fair single-player game of computer Battleship. So much of Battleship comes down to fog of war and not seeing the location of your opponent's ships, which of course is a detail the CPU manages for you in a game like this. A solo session in Navy Blue 90 is the equivalent of giving your opponent your board, asking them to place your ships for you, then letting them make both your moves and theirs while their board remains hidden from you. A certain pretense of willful ignorance has to be programmed into the AI routines for this style of game in order for the CPU to give you a fighting chance. And bless Navy Blue 90's heart, it doesn't even pretend. From the very outset of the game, Navy Blue 90's AI is perfectly happy to demolish you. My very first attempt to take on the computer resulted in the CPU utterly curb-stomping my fleet with a flawless victory, including a coup de grace so infuriating it wraps around the other side to be hilarious. It hit my tiny, single-square fighter plane off by itself in a remote corner of the ocean on its first try. Subsequent rounds made me realize that the CPU basically pretends to be stupid based on your performance. If you whiff, it'll miss its marks too. Once you land a hit though, it takes off its gloves and quickly dismantles your fleet. Basically, the only way to win the single player here is to be extremely lucky with your hits and clear out the computer before it can wipe you out with its flawless precision. I guess that's not the worst flaw in the world, since the point here really is to play against another person, but it does limit the appeal of the game. Now, given that the American release of Battleship, aka Navy Blue, didn't arrive until December 1992, I have no idea why Mindscape picked up the original Navy Blue for localization rather than this somewhat more refined version. Maybe they were turned off by the high difficulty, or maybe the new additions to the sandbox strayed too far from Battleship's canon, as it were. Whatever the case, the good news is that we get a reprieve from this series after its rapid sequel release. The third and final Navy Blue title, Navy Blue 98, won't arrive until February of 1998, where it must have been a real oddity amidst the hacky Pokemon clones that define the dying days of the monochrome Game Boy system, which means that we can focus on more important things for the next 8 years, like bad sports games and sluggish platformers and tedious puzzlers. Next on Game Boy Works, 2 sports games, probably bad.